Great. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, works. It's a
Wonderful.
huge control panel, but we can see your screen.
Yeah, I hope that disappears at some point. Yeah, there we go. Great. So, welcome everyone. I wanted to again keep this super casual, make it really conversational because where I'm coming from is when Nikki approached me, we know each other from through a common friend who's also based in the Silicon Valley. He mentioned to me what an amazing group of people he's hosting, and he said, bring whatever makes you feel comfortable talking about. So I said, I've been living in the Silicon Valley for over 16 years, and ever since I moved there, I've been working at Google. You could go to business school and learn a lot of things. I feel Google has been like business school for me. There's been so many different things that I've learned from a philosophical mindset, but also how you approach different problems, how you seek different solutions. So I thought it would be interesting to share with you my top 5 learnings, what I call my principles of innovation. So I did not realize this was a mixed group, so I have the slides in German, but there's not much text on it anyway, so don't fret. It's a lot of imagery, and obviously my voiceover will make a lot more sense than just looking at the slides. So before I get started, actually, let me go back. Let me ask each one of you, and since we have a chat feature here, I would love to hear from each one of you, just in a couple of words maybe, when you think of the term innovation, what comes to mind? Maybe just use the chat window to type in the first couple of words that come to mind when you think of innovation. I will wait. I know awkward silences are a thing in video conferences, but I know it also takes time to type, so totally fine.
You have 3 already.
Great. I'm trying to see, yes, here. New paradigm, something that solves a problem, the process from the idea to the solution. Wonderful. These are all pretty valid answers, but I always feel there's something more to innovation. There's what do you do with it, but then there's also a how do you do it, right? What environment do you need to be innovative? A lot of people can come up with ideas given the right circumstances, but a lot of times you first need to create those circumstances for people to be innovative. So in the English dictionary, a lot of times when you look up innovation, it will have terms like a new method, a new idea, a new product, but none of these dictionary terms define how do you create the environment to be innovative. You don't just go to your desk one day. In fact, most innovation doesn't happen at desks. Most of you will probably relate with me when I say my best ideas happen in the shower. So nothing happens at work necessarily or while I'm talking to a certain colleague, but it happens organically. So what environments do we need to create for people to be innovative? And that's kind of what I'll be talking about mostly today. And I'll share lots of examples with you from my life at Google and what I've learned there. But again, interrupt me anytime, and I've lived the life for 16 years, so I can tell you more and more of the stories that I've seen there. So let's get started. I will show you the German definition. I'll skip over this. For those of you who understand German, you'll see it's a very, very strict and very put into a box type of definition. That's not how I personally see innovation. But we'll skip through this, and I will show you this image. Do any of you know what I'm showing you here?
Steve Jobs' garage.
Very close, but not Steve Jobs. Very, very close.
Your garage.
No, I wish. No. Oh my God, I wish this was my.
It's for Stephen Wozniak, the garage.
This is Susan Wozniak's garage.
Okay.
So Susan Wojcicki, she is today the CEO of YouTube, but back in 1998, she used to live in this house, and she was a Stanford PhD student, and she was trying to kind of pay the mortgage of this house, which as a student was a little hard. So she said, I'm going to rent out my garage to somebody and then get some extra income. So she was connected to Larry Page and Sergey Brin, who are the founders of Google, and they said, okay, we'll rent out your garage, and because we are working on this thing called a little search engine, we don't even have a name for it, but we might need this space. So this infamous house is our first world headquarters of Google, so to say. If you look inside the garage, this is what it looked like. These are the two founders. On the left is Larry Page, on the right is Sergey Brin. And this used to be everything from Susan's storage in the back, as you can see the boxes, to our data center, conference rooms, boardroom. Everything happened in this little garage. Fast forward that by about 21 years, and we are looking at this. Now, in Corona times, this is probably how it's looking right now, pretty empty. But this is a shot from one of our main campus buildings in Mountain View. If any of you ever find yourself in California, in Mountain View, hopefully after Corona is over, please get in touch. I'd be happy to show you around. But this is a really, really nice kind of reminder of how the company has grown from a little garage to now over, I would say, 200 buildings in the Silicon Valley, with this being the headquarters. My office is right behind, like about 20 meters behind this glass window here. It's really where everything happens, from engineering to business. There's a little partner center to the right of this building where we invite our largest advertising partners and we do a strategy discussions. So clearly a lot has changed over the last 21 years, right? A little bit in numbers, we have over 110,000 full-time Googlers. Many people ask, but that seems not enough. And you're right, because we also have a similarly large-sized contractor force. So we have about 110,000 contractors that are employed at other companies, but work on-site, not right now, but usually on-site at Google. We have about 150 offices in 60 countries. Obviously, our revenues have been increasing, thankfully, year over year. We are at about $140 billion right now. And the most interesting part to me, whenever I look at these numbers, is the annual increase in revenue or the annual increase in valuation, right? It's always a double-digit number, even though the company has been in existence for 21 years now. And that's the hard part, but also the part that makes me think, what did this company do that maybe other companies didn't do? Like, how did this innovation happen that we are still able to grow in double digits every single year? And those are the 5 principles that I want to kind of bring closer to you. They might seem a little, oh, this is obvious, but if you look at each company out in the Silicon Valley, it's really not that obvious. When you live it every single day in the culture and how employees behave with each other and how seniors treat their employees, it really, really makes a difference. So for those of you that remember the very first google.com website, this is what it used to look like about 20-ish years ago. Give me your honest opinion. What do you think of the site or this specific layout of the site?
Naked. But I think it was great by the time because of being so naked and lean.
I would say it was actually pretty crowded. It's far more naked now.
Well, the interesting thing for me is it's copyright Stanford University.
Yes, yeah, they copyrighted it because they were still Stanford students at that time. But also it's pretty, I mean, in my terms, I would probably say it's pretty ugly, right? There's all these different fonts, different sizes, different links, colors. The Google logo obviously used to be different. But there's one thing that really stood out on this site, even when you think back about 20 years, right underneath the search box, under the 3 tabs there, it says, index contains 25 million pages, soon to be much bigger. Whenever I look at this, I think this page, by the way, was designed by Sergey Brin himself. And he, if you talk to him today, he will admit, I didn't have very good HTML skills. This is all I could put together back then. But he will admit that, yes, I did have a vision. I did have a drive to make this much bigger, and hence I put that on the site. And all these years later, 21 years later, this is what the site looks like right now. It's very sporadic, very naked, as you said, Nikki. But there's 2 things that have been added since, despite removing everything else. Can anybody tell me what those 2 things are?
I'm feeling lucky.
And the mic.
No, I will go back. If you can, if you look at the right underneath the search bar on the right, the I'm feeling lucky was already there.
Okay. Then
The microphone?
Microphone, yeah.
Correct. The microphone is number 1, and that happened about 7-8 years ago when we realized that voice searches are going to be more and more popular way of for people to search. So that's why it was added. There's one more thing that was added.
Can you go back?
Not as obvious.
Can you go back one more time?
Yeah.
Is it the search suggestions?
No, you don't have to explain what it is.
No,
It doesn't explain what
it's
it is.
very not obvious. It's that little blinking cursor. Do you see that blinking
Oh.
line here?
Mm-hmm.
It's not very obvious, but the reason we had to add it, a little fun story around this is we did a lot of UX experimentation once this new version of the site was designed. So we invited people into the Google office and we asked them to do their searches on this new page. And believe it or not, people would sit in front of the computer and just wait. And then we asked them, well, why aren't you searching? And they said, well, the site still hasn't completely loaded. It's so empty. I'm sure there must be more. I'm sure the computer, the internet is slow, and that's why I'm just waiting until it loads. So that was a reminder for us, okay, people aren't realizing that that's how clean we want the site to be. So we had to add that cursor to make them realize that everything is ready and they can start typing. This is just a little fun anecdote there. But a lot has happened since. Obviously 21 years of innovation doesn't just look like this side to this side. There's a lot that has happened on the back end. And I want to show you some real examples, and hopefully I can do live demos and that will work over video conference. I've never done this before, but let's try. So the first innovation, as I mentioned, was this addition of voice searches. And while it seems simple, I want to demonstrate to you why it isn't really as simple as most of us as consumers think. Because the way humans talk to each other is very different from the way a computer listens and understands. Right? Normally, if I were to talk to a computer, I would have to repeat every single sentence as if it's a new sentence for the computer because it doesn't understand context. But let me show you what I did. I was in New York City about 5 years ago. I was visiting a friend there. And we went to the Museum of Modern Art. Some of you may have visited. On the 3rd floor, they have all the European exhibits, so all the Picasso, Salvador Dali's. And we were standing in front of a Picasso painting. And since I grew up in Europe, I said, I remember from art history classes in school that Picasso had a middle name. I don't remember what it was, but I know it wasn't just Pablo Picasso. There was a name in between. And my friend said, no, I don't think he had a middle name. So to settle the dispute, I pulled out my phone, and I'll do the live demo for you. Again, hopefully it works. I asked my phone, what is Pablo Picasso's middle name? Share the screen.
According to Britannica, Pablo Picasso, in full Pablo Diego José Francisco de Paula Juan Nepomuceno Crispiniano Maria Remedios de la Santísima Trinidad Ruiz Picasso, also called Pablo Ruiz or Pablo Ruiz Picasso.
So I'm not going to complete this, but now you know why I didn't remember his middle name, because this man had like 16 or 17 middle names. But then, this was a simple question, right? I asked for his middle name. But now, let me show you what I did next. I got curious and I asked, who was he married to?
Pablo Picasso was married to Jacqueline Roque and Olga Koklova.
Now, did you notice that the second time I asked my question, I didn't say who was Pablo Picasso married to? I just said, who was he married to? Right? This is something that computers were never designed to understand, because this contextual conversation only happens between humans. So this is what all these years of innovation took to bring to the forefront in technology, which is now called natural language processing. Right? All of this wouldn't have been possible unless there was all this technology in the back end that allowed the computer to understand like a human understands. Seems little to us because it's normal for us as humans, but for machines and the development of machines, it's actually a huge, huge deal. Next one here. Any of you who uses Google Photos? Nobody? Well, I highly recommend you do. Not because it's a product, but it's really, I travel a lot, both for work, but also personally. And for the last 10 years or so, I've stopped taking my DSLR camera with me. I just take my cell phone to take pictures. And every place I go, I take tons of pictures, and I come back to California. And in the past, I used to spend at least 3-4 hours every, once I came back on a weekend to organize my pictures, put them in albums, share it with the right people, categorize them, delete the bad ones. It took me a lot of time, and I hated doing that. Nowadays, I'll show you what I can do. I just take the pictures, I don't ever touch them again, And let's say I wanted to look at all the pictures that I've ever taken of flowers, okay? So let's do this live demo. Show me all my pictures of flowers.
Showing your photos of flowers.
So now I can scroll through this, and these are literally all the pictures that I have personally ever taken that have a flower or flowers in them. Right? That's how easy organizing pictures have become. And now I could say, put these all in an album and send it to my sister, or whatever I want to do with it. It's literally just a voice command away instead of manually pulling all of that information together. So that's, again, on the surface, it seems easy and natural, but in the back end, that required a lot of innovation. Now, let me show you one last example here. Have any of you used Google Lens? No? It's a really cool product, and this became more popular, I would say, about 2 or 3 years ago. It's a newer technology. But how often do you go, or not shopping, but how often do you see a friend or a family member wearing something really cool that you would like to have, but you're not sure whether you should ask them where they bought it from or how much they bought it for? Or sometimes you go to somebody's house and you see a piece of furniture and you're like, whoa, this is really cool and I would like to have this in my house, but I don't know if I should ask them where they got it from, right? There's always these questions, or anything other than that. Like if you're going outside and you see a flower and you don't know what the flower is called, you can just pull up your camera. So you go just to your regular camera app, and let me see, in my environment, I literally have a Kinderpingui. It's a little chocolate here right in front of me. I'm going to take a picture of this. So here's the picture that I took of the Kinderpingui. Now I'm going to click on this little button here, the Google Lens button. It's going to analyze that image for me. And it's showing me the search result, Kinderpingui, Cocos, 4-pack, €1.39. It shows me the site where I can buy it and why I'm one click away from making that purchase. This was a little example, but imagine you could use this for a fancy car that you see and you want to know what the price of that car is, or somebody wearing cool shoes, or even if you, let's say you go to a new city and you're looking at a monument and you don't know who that person is in the monument. You can hold up your camera, take a picture, and then click on Google Lens, and it will give you all the information that is relevant to you at that point, right? Again, seems very intuitive and very helpful, but didn't happen just by chance. There were very specific certain steps in an environment of innovation of why these things happened in the first place. And those are the ones that I'm going to talk you through today. So first of all, these is on the slide, you're just a small selection of products that Google came out with over the last 20 or so years. Some of them are already crossed out, and by now probably a lot more. But the reason I'm showing you this is that we have this philosophy where we say, don't just come up with 10 ideas, because if your success rate is 10%, how many good ideas will we end up with if we started with 10? One idea, exactly. Now let's say if you start with 100 ideas and your success rate is still 10%, you're already at 10 ideas. So whenever we do brainstorming, on our product teams and our engineering teams, we get into a conference room and it's almost like throwing spaghetti at a wall. No idea is ever too dumb, right? Everybody is like, okay, let's just put it out there. And then we'll put more rigor behind it and see, is it feasible to do this? Is it not feasible to do that? But at least let's start with as many ideas as we can, because knowing our success rate will probably fail 90% of the time, but then we'll still end up with more good ideas because we started with a much, much broader base. And this is almost like this yes and philosophy. You might have heard it in other contexts. Never say no but if somebody is saying and putting forward an idea, always say yes and. So that's one of the philosophies that's working really, really well for the company culture. This is the result of all these failures that we've had over the years, right? So many products that have failed and are still failing. Like, we expect many of the products we come out to fail. But these 9 are what we call the prestigious family of Google 1 billion citizens. So each one of these products is every single month used by more than 1 billion active users. So you might recognize many of these. In case you don't, this is Google Search, YouTube, Maps, Gmail, Chrome, the browser, the Android operating system, the Google Play Store, Photos, and then Drive, which is the folder organization system and data organization system. But these are obviously just a small sample of what we had to go through to get to 9 products that actually succeeded. Right? And that's why I always say people only hear about success stories, but they forget that there have been many, many failures behind those success stories, and we can't ignore them. Right? If you're working for a company and you expect, or you own a company and you expect to only come out with successes, or you only start an idea thinking that this is close enough to a success, you will have probably missed so many opportunities. Right? That's why always start with a broad base and then funnel it down. And you don't even have to think about funneling it down. The market will tell you what's working and what's not. So first principle, innovation comes from anywhere. That is one of my most favorite principles, I must say. It's not very obvious for the European context. I grew up in Germany, and I know there's much more of a hierarchical system in German companies, at least, where whatever the boss's opinion is, everybody else kind of has to conform to that opinion. At Google, at least, we have a philosophy where we say we will not hire a specific person called Chief Innovation Officer, or we won't have an innovation department per se, which is separate from the rest of the company. Instead, every single person that we hire in the interview process, we make sure that they have innovation as their DNA, so to say. So all the questions that we ask and the conversations we have with the candidate, we make sure that they will be their own Chief Innovation Officer once they join the company. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of how that plays out at the company. So if you look at this image, this is Dr. Ronnie Seiger. He is not a PhD kind of doctor, which you would expect at a company like Google. He's actually a medical doctor. And we hired him about, let's say, 14, 15 years ago now. He was employed because at that time we were working on the Google knowledge base. So when you type in a medical term in Google, on the right-hand side, you'll see a knowledge graph that has a lot of information about that disease or the medication. And we wanted him to help us curate that experience. So 2 months into joining the company, again, very junior, right, in terms of tenure, he's like, I'm going to do some research. He was sitting in front of his computer, and he saw something that really concerned him. Now, at any other company, if you've just joined 2 months ago, you would probably feel a little shy and not speak up about what you're feeling uncomfortable about, right? Because this would cost you your job. But he went to Larry Page, who was one of the 2 co-founders, and he said, Larry, I was doing some research and I saw something that is making me feel uneasy. I feel uncomfortable that Google does that. So Larry said, what is it? And Dr. Ronnie Seiger said, well, let me demonstrate this to you a little bit more visually or verbally in this case. He said, when I type in, let's say, Wimbledon, London into my google.com search browser, what happens? So Larry said, well, you'll probably see information about Wimbledon, about the city, about the tennis match. Like that's how our algorithm is supposed to work. And he said, okay, what happens if I type Netherlands in there? And he said, same thing. You would see information about the country, about the people, the population. He said, correct. Then he said, what happens when you type in suicide into the Google search browser, the search engine? And that made Larry think, and he said, well, the way the algorithm is designed to work, you will most likely see top 10 ways to commit suicide or tools used to commit suicide, because the algorithm is doing the right thing, but from Dr. Ronnie Seiger's perspective and any human's perspective, that is the wrong thing to do. Right? If somebody is typing in suicide, you want to help them not commit suicide rather than pushing them in that direction. So Dr. Ronnie Zeiger said, we need to change something about that. I don't feel comfortable that we are delivering these results. And Larry's motto is always, in God we trust, everyone else bring data. In God we trust, everyone else bring data. So Dr. Ronnie Zeiger went back and he said, I have to prove to Larry that this is a big enough problem, right? It's not just 1 or 2 people typing suicide into Google. So he went back, did some more research, and 15 years ago, back then, just in the United States, every year, 40,000 people committed suicide. Just imagine the scale of that massive thing. 40,000 people just in the US. Globally, obviously, that number must be much, much larger. So when Larry saw that data, he was convinced that even if we can save 1% or 0.5% of the people who are typing in suicide, and by not showing them how to commit suicide, that would be a big win for humanity. So believe it or not, over the next month, he created a task force amongst the engineers and the product teams and said, let's change your algorithm, which, by the way, is something that has never been touched because it's the secret sauce of the company and it's supposed to be fair. But this was a big enough reason to change it. And now what happens is when you type in suicide, you'll see the local National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, at least for the countries that have agreed to doing that. The day this was released, the next day, there was an article in the New York Times, and they mentioned that the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in the US had a 9% higher call volume that day. Just imagine people who were typing in suicide and seeing this number, 9% more people were calling this lifeline. And the reason I told you this long story is not to, to tell you this story, but really to show you that it doesn't matter how long you've been part of an organization or how credible you are in this situation, right? If you speak up and it makes sense based on the data that you're presenting, there is always somebody at the company who will listen. And that's been the philosophy ever since. It doesn't matter, how junior in your ranking you are, how new to the company you are, as long as you have a good idea, you're supposed to speak up. So this is what the New York Times quoted the next day. Another really good example of that is any of you have been to the Silicon Valley, you probably saw there's a lot of large white company buses shuttling up and down the freeways in the mornings and the evenings. And this all started with the idea of an administrative assistant, so a secretary, about 10 years ago. She was Larry Page's administrative assistant, and she was coming down from San Francisco to Mountain View every day in her car. She said, I know at least 7 more people who do the same commute every day. Larry, can I just rent a van for a week and just have all these people join me, and then we'll drive down together, and that way we'll save the environment, we'll make traffic better, and 6 of them can sleep in the back while I'm driving. And he said, yeah, that's a great idea. Here's some money, go rent a van. And then do it for 4 weeks and come back to me with what you learned from this experiment. So she did that. She was so overrun with requests, she created a spreadsheet of all the people that wanted to join her from San Francisco, but there was only 6 spaces left in the van. So after 4 weeks, she went back to Larry and said, the van is too small. Can we now try it with a bus? And he said, yes, here's money. Go rent a bus for a couple of weeks. And she did that. And over time, now this program has grown to over 200 buses that leave Google every morning to bring employees that live in certain areas to work and then drive them back home in the evening. Right? That idea started from somebody who might not feel she had the authority to speak up, but she did, and today this is a very, very successful program that has been replicated by other companies since. So I'll take a quick pause here, see if you have any comments, questions so far. All good?
Yeah.
Great, so let's move on to the second one. Launch and iterate. So this is another principle that's very near and dear to everyone working at Google. I always say there's 2 different models in the Silicon Valley. There's the Apple model, which is always come out with the perfect product, but don't let anybody know what that's going to be in advance. And then there's this model that Google has, release a product, keep it in alpha for a while, keep it in beta for a while, let consumers give you their input, and then keep improving it little by little. A great example of that is the Google Chrome web browser. So that was first conceptualized in the year 2009, which, by the way, in the history of coming out with new products was probably one of the worst years because we were in a recession. And yet, Larry and Sergey thought there is a better way to design a browser. Everybody in the company that was working on that project kind of started rolling their eyes, and they're like, really, this is not a good time. Internet Explorer, Netscape, Firefox already own 95% of market share. Why should we come out with a new browser? And they said, believe us, we don't have to do all the design ourselves. We'll just put the product out there, and every 6 weeks, we will have a little feedback button on the top right of the browser, and we'll invite developers and consumers to give us their feedback and see what else they would like to see in a browser. So since then, every 6 to 8 weeks, there has been a new version of the browser. This is the logo for those of you who recognize it now. And on this slide, you'll see the market share change because of the new releases that were based on consumer feedback. So we launched and iterated every 6 to 8 weeks, and you can clearly see the blue line is kind of driving everyone out of the water there because they were very, very successful with these new versions, and the fact that it was not designed by engineers for people, but it was designed, or at least requested by people for people, and then designed by engineers. So just that approach of not always having to be perfect, but being open to feedback has been super helpful at the company as well. Next principle, some of you might have heard of this. So Google has a philosophy called 20% time. And this stems from the fact that Larry and Sergey used to be students at Stanford. And they said, when we start a company, we don't want everybody to just be sitting at their desks and doing their work all day, every hour. Because at Stanford, we also had a lot of free time between classes. Right? We would go to our lectures, but there was all this time in between where we could collaborate with others, network, come up with new ideas. So you want to give our employees that flexibility to have the same environment at their work. So anybody who has an idea, even if it's not related to their core job, can go to their managers and say, hey, I have this idea, I want to work on this project, whatever it is. Can you carve out 20% of my time? And that could be 1 day a week, that could be 2 hours a day. To be honest with you, most of the time it's in addition to a full-time job, so it becomes 120% time. But because we're so passionate about that idea, and you're given the flexibility, but also the resources that the company has in terms of time, money, tools, data, that it's so fruitful for the company. Many of the products you might use and know would not have existed if it wasn't for this 20% time. A couple of great examples. Gmail came out of a 20% project. Google News came out of a 20% project. Maps came out of a 20% project. Imagine not having these, right? Just because your manager told you, hey, I'm not going to give you extra time to work on this project. And obviously the intellectual property is then owned by Google, but just because it was your passion, you invested so much in it. And obviously as an employee, you reap the benefits too. But generally, letting people work on things that they are truly passionate about is usually better than giving them things to work on. Here, another great example of 20% time used very wisely. So this obviously is Stonehenge. Marcus, you may have visited, you're not too far from there, but you have?
Of course.
I
have a house which is 30 kilometers from that.
Maybe I can't hear you, but I believe you're on mute. Anyhow, this is a story of another engineer at Google who was going to visit Stonehenge with his wife that summer on a vacation, and he wanted to show his wife what it's going to look like on Google Maps, on the Street View imagery. But then when he zoomed in into the map, there was a fence in front of it. For any of you who've been there, you can't just walk around on the lawn. There's actually a fence, and you have to look through that. So he said, well, I can afford to take my wife there and show her that, Stonehenge, even through a fence, but there might be many people in the world who can't travel there for whatever reason. And the only thing they have is this real imagery through Google Maps, but with a fence in front of it. So when he went there that summer, he talked to the authorities and he said, would you allow me to drive around your lawn and take, we have these 360-degree cameras that go on top of cars to take street view imagery. Would you allow me to take an imagery from behind the fence? And they said, no, are you stupid? Like, we're not going to let you drive on our lawn. It's going to ruin our beautiful lawn. So he got a little sad, but he kept thinking, innovative minds. And he said, what if I drove a bike over your lawn? Would that be okay? And they said, fine. After a lot of negotiation, yeah, a bike is not going to ruin our lawn. So they allowed him to drive a bike around there, and he took that seriously. He went to Italy on that same trip, bought a little old ice cream cart, redesigned that 360-degree camera in a much smaller format to put on top of the ice cream cart. And this is the original that goes on a car. This is what the ice cream cart camera looks like. Let me play this video for you. I'm going to stop here. You get the idea, right? He was able to make it his 20% project when he came back to California. He told his manager, I have this idea. There's many places in the world where you can't take a car. If you've been to Asia, there's some countries that have really narrow alleys, or even in Europe, right? In Italy, there's many small, narrow alleys. What about you giving me 20% of my work time, and I will start mapping out all these areas? And that became such a success that not only has he designed a bike version, he's also designed a backpack version. So if you're an avid hiker, you can take one of these backpack cameras with you. And initially, they were very heavy. They were about 20 kgs. But now the form factor is reduced to about 5-6 kgs. And you can map out trails. Or if you're in Venice, we have designed cameras that can go on top of these gondolas. And you can map out the waterways in Venice. This is my most favorite one. This is a camera designed for the back of a camel. So you can go into the desert and map out the desert. We have a special version for Scotland. I don't have an image for it, but we realized that Scotland has more sheep than human population. So we designed tiny little cameras that can be put on the back of a sheep, and they can map out the hills, the beautiful hills of Scotland. Again, this project started as a 20% project, but it became a full-time job for the specific engineer, and only because he was allowed to take that first step. Right? Next principles, 10x thinking. So 10x thinking is defined as not just linearly or incrementally becoming better. So when you think, oh, my product is pretty good, and I'm going to make it 10% better, and that's enough to survive for me for the time being, especially in technology, you're going to be obsolete very, very soon, because technology doesn't just improve 10% incrementally, it just changes very rapidly every single year. So 10x thinking is this philosophy of finding a very, very large problem that needs to be solved, finding a radical solution to it, and with radical, I mean it has to be so radical that when you explain that solution to somebody or when you talk to them about it, they must say, you must be stupid to think about this. This is impossible. And then lastly, you pair that with a breakthrough technology. So these are, I'm going to skip to this quote, but these are the three ingredients. Very large problem, a radical solution to the problem, and a breakthrough technology. And at the intersection of these three is where 10x thinking happens. Right? Why does the problem need to be big? Because otherwise it doesn't make sense to invest all those resources behind it. I think one great example of an intersection of these three is what Elon Musk set out to do between Los Angeles and Northern California with the Hyperloop. Right? The big problem was that there was too much traffic. It took too long for people to go from one city to other. The radical solution was, okay, I'm going to beam people there in a little tube, and the technology was what then went into designing that. So that's a great example. Another great example, some of you might have seen this, some of you might not. How many of you have heard of Project Loon? L-O-O-N?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see a couple of head nods. Great. So for those of you who haven't heard of it, This was designed, I would say, almost about maybe 8, 9 years ago now. This technology came out of Google's X division, which is more of the experimental division at Google. And the idea was we want to make sure that not just the rich northern hemisphere countries have access to internet, but we want to make sure that poor countries who would have to pay a lot of money for monthly internet access can also get cheap internet or maybe even free internet. So they designed this technology that looks like a balloon. It is powered by helium, so there's no electricity in this. It's all helium powered. It has all the routers and modems and whatever is required to beam internet to the ground in that little attachment at the bottom. It's almost like a hot air balloon. And depending on what height in the stratosphere it's let loose in, because the wind streams are different in every height zone, it can be navigated to the east or to the west based on that. So initially this was meant a little bit more of as a commercial product, but then very soon we realized that this is actually a great community service tool for areas that have been hit by floods or by lightning or tsunamis. And then we started deploying these to Peru, to Japan, where there were natural disasters, and people still had their cell phones. They might not have a house at that point, but they had their cell phones. And through this internet connection, they were able to stay in touch with their families and friends and get the help that they needed. So this technology, again, came out of the thinking, I mean, who in the world comes up with the idea of designing a crazy balloon like this to provide internet to the ground? But the reason this was designed is because somebody knew that if we don't help the rest of the world get internet access, they're going to be left behind, even more than before. And there was, in this group that designed this, there was a kite surfer. So he knew a lot about aerodynamics, and he said, I know how kites function. Let me see if I can apply that knowledge to this balloon. Radical solutions to a very big problem, and obviously the technology that was then used behind it. This is another video that I'm going to send. Yeah, go ahead.
What is the status of the project in a moment?
What was the question?
The status of the project?
Oh, this is now no longer a Project X project. It's become a standalone company. Mm-hmm. And this balloon technology is now obviously helping still with the humanitarian efforts in, floods and tsunamis and all that. But we're also partnering, for example, with the government of New Zealand. So New Zealand has a lot of stretches where regular Wi-Fi isn't available. So we're partnering with the government there to beam internet from these balloons to the people in the more rural areas. Yeah. And lastly, I wanted to share with you my last, but probably most close to my heart principle. And I'm going to be really vulnerable here because I understand a lot of the talks that you've been listening to are all about vulnerability and sharing your true self. So this is me sharing a piece of me with you. The last principle is, for those of you in English, I'll translate it. It means a mission that matters, right? Innovation can only happen if I feel connected to a mission that matters to me personally. And many of you may think, well, you live in the Silicon Valley, you've been there for 16 years. Why haven't you worked anywhere else? I mean, everybody on average switches companies every 3 to 4 years. And my answer truly is this one line, because I feel so connected to this company's mission that I don't feel like, $58,000 extra can lure me to another company. That doesn't excite me because the mission may not be aligned with me as it is with this company. And I'll walk you through how it aligns in my case. So this is my family, my parents to my left and right, and my brother and sister. This is a picture from India from last year when we were still able to travel. And we were at a wedding there. So our entire story, our family story, started in India. My parents moved from India to Germany in about 1976. In fact, tomorrow, my dad completes 44 years in Germany. It's 1976 is when he moved here. So all the way from India, they moved to Germany with the prospect of having a better future, having a better life for their family. And my dad is a gemstone dealer, so there's a little town here in Germany called Ida Oberstein, which is known for the gemstone trade. So that's why he moved here initially. Then years later, when my mom first got pregnant, she had gone to California because my maternal grandparents used to live in Los Angeles back then. And in India, it's tradition to have your firstborn child at your parents' house. So my mother had, gone to visit her parents to give birth to me. So again, lots of movement happening here. Then, as I was about 2-3 months old, my parents, my dad came to LA, and then my mom, my dad, and I went back to Germany. That's where I grew up for about 23 years. I did all my education, my college, everything here. And then after college was done, another set of movement, I immigrated this time. So like my parents went from India to Germany, I this time went from Germany to California for the job that I was taking on there. 10 years later, after me being in California, my sister and brother joined me there as well. My sister also works at Google now, and my brother came for business school, so he was doing his MBA there. With all this movement, we realized that now that our parents are alone in Germany, there's a lot of moments in our life that they miss out on. We can talk to each other on the phone, but it's not the same as being there in person. So how do we share more of our life with them? Oftentimes, my sister works up there in San Francisco. She'll spend her days in San Francisco. My brother was at Stanford University, so he would be somewhere in Palo Alto. And I was at Google, working and doing my stuff in Mountain View. So even though we were in the same area, we weren't always sharing our lives very much. And there are certain products that Google has designed that really help us stay connected, right? And they're not revenue generating products. So this example, this is again, from Google Photos. I remember this was January evening last year. We went to my brother's dorm at Stanford University, my sister and I. We met there, had a little family dinner, and then we played board games afterwards. We took some pictures while having dinner and playing games. And then the next morning, when I was back at my house in Santa Clara, I woke up, I think it was a Saturday or Sunday, and on my phone there was a notification. It said, we have put together these 13 pictures that you took of yourself, your brother and sister in an album. And underneath it showed me these little bubbles of my sister, my brother, and my parents. And it said, do you want to share this pre-created album with your family? I had to do literally nothing except for review and then click submit. But it was so easy for me to share an evening that I had spent with my brother and sister, with my parents, with them, in case they wanted to save the memories. So this is, again, it may seem very transactional in a way, but for me, this means I'm able to share more of who I am as a person and what I'm missing by not being close to my family with them. Another example, we have a shared calendar as a family, a Google Calendar. And because all of us travel so much, I travel tons for work. My sister goes to Sydney all the time for work. My parents travel between India and here and all around Europe. So we put all our travel reservations on this shared calendar. So just in case there's ever an emergency or we need to know where, which person is at this given time, we can all look this up very easily on this shared family calendar. Now, these are just little examples of products that don't cost me as a user anything to use, but that make people's lives so much easier. And even though I work in advertising and marketing, which is probably not the most noble career, like it's not like I'm a doctor or something, but the mission that this company has of making people's lives easier really drives me to go to work every single day and do what's important. Another example of that is I was in Argentina just about a year and a half ago for a conference. And after the conference, some of the attendees, we started talking. And one of them was a student who had graduated maybe 3 years ago. He was working at an ad agency. And he said, I want to share something with you. And I said, yeah, what is it? He said, I have to owe my career to the fact that I had access to Google searches. I'm like, how? Explain that to me. He said, I come from a very low-income family. We lived in an area where internet connection wasn't very easily available. So I used to go to the next closest library where I used to do Google searches on how I can get out of this and get a proper education and get a proper job. And those searches really allowed me to see what's out there in the world, because otherwise I would have never had access to that. So there's somebody telling me he's getting a job because of a search engine that is free because of all the other paid products. And similarly, I was working on a kind of like a humanitarian project in Nepal a couple of years ago. It was related to sex trafficking of children over there. So a team of about 12 Googlers went out there and we helped for 2 weeks. And the idea was to design tools that you could put on a cell phone, and you know, the kids that either had access or could ask somebody to help them could click on something and give the location of that child so then the police can come and help. So I was talking to a couple of children there and they got so curious because they were poor children. They didn't have access to the internet. So I was just sitting there with my laptop and they said, you know, we've never seen the ocean. We don't know what an octopus looks like. So I took them to the Google Earth and there's an underwater imagery section there. And we were just like floating around in the ocean digitally for 15, 20 minutes. And just seeing the sparkle in the eyes of those kids, like that excited me so much. And I just knew that this mission really matters to me. So regardless of whether I'm working on a revenue product or not, I want to support this mission. And this may sound very unique to Google, but honestly, any company can make this happen. I work with a lot of large advertisers at Google, you know, global companies, and I always tell them, ask your employees periodically, why are you still working for me? Is it because of the money? If they say yes, they might or might not be a good fit for your company for the long term. If they say there's something more, something outside of, you know, money and career, that's the type of employee you want to hold on to, because they truly buy in your mission, buy into your mission, and have created their own mission of why they're there. So that's the last thing I wanted to share with you. And here again, the 5 principles I shared. Innovation comes from everywhere. Launch and iterate. Give your employees 20% time or whatever amount of time to think about their passions. Enable 10x thinking and provide the tools to do 10x thinking. And then always make sure that there's a mission that matters to everybody. I know I did a lot of talking. We're a little bit over time, but I'll take any last 1 or 2 questions.
Thank you so much for that journey. I felt like, so I'm preaching the exponential organization, and there are so many essentials of the exponential organizations. We talk about the MTP, the massive transformative purpose, so much that fits together. So you're talking to my heart. Thank you so much for sharing this.
My pleasure.